originally, U.S. was demanding a 1-for-2 deal. They would send Viktor Bout to Russia in exchange for both Paul Whelan and Brittney Griner, the WNBA star who got picked up on having drugs contained in some vaping materials. She pled guilty. Paul Whelan did not. Whelan is serving a longer sentence and a harsher conditions. Russia made it clear they would do 1-for-1. There's other Russians in U.S. custody that they want traded back, so that but they're not doing any 1-for-2, 1-for-3, 1-for-4 deals. And so Biden came back. Griner was the one. Brittney Griner is a black lesbian WNBA celebrity charged on drug charges. That puts her in a lot of Democratic check-the-box categories. She also had very effective, aggressive advocates. Paul Whelan, by contrast, has a bit of a sketchy past, purportedly endorsed Trump in 2016. So there was very little mojo for him, though his pedigree sounded like a more stronger grounds to bring back if he actually was a spy.
Let me stop you there just for 1 second, because I know that I can't verify everything. People on the left are saying Whelan was a thief or something. Like, what are the sketchy things of his history that are legit, that are unknown? Or
you know he's Canadian, by the way.
Well, I did know that. I mean, people are saying Viktor Bout should be Canadian with a name like that, but I knew he's Canadian. Actually, I saw that he came down to the States, and I knew that part of it, which is interesting.
Yeah, yes. He carries 4 passports. His parents are of Irish descent who lived in Britain, who moved to Canada and in the U.S. That is why he has Irish passports, British passports, Canadian passports, and United States passports. He said, he answered in depositions once that he had served in a bunch of police capacities. Then those police agencies came back and said, no, he didn't. So that's just one part of it. Volunteered for the Marines. Appears to have been dishonorably kicked out of the Marines. But after he's dishonorably discharged from the Marines, he gets these high-end intelligence security gigs for big companies. I can tell you historically, that usually means you're a spook. So that's what his resume reads like to me. One of those classic gray space James Ellroy characters, Frank Sturgis types. You kind of even a G. Gordon Liddy type. So he was over in Russia. He claimed he was there for a wedding. He didn't go to certain wedding events. The Russians made fun of his defense publicly because he was caught receiving a USB stick from a decently high-ranking FSB person who he purportedly had previously told people he had special relationship with. He said he thought he was just getting photos of like churches and cathedrals and tourism photos. That didn't sell well over in Russia. They were quite convinced he was engaged in espionage, but it was not clear whether it was governmental espionage or industrial espionage. But again, a lot of your spook types moonlight or front for private corporations and companies. So that his resume reads to me like an Oswald type spook operator. Mm-hmm. But to the Russians, it was absurd that you would say, please send me the drug addict, what they consider sexual deviant under their laws, not your hero spy, in exchange for who you think is one of the greatest arms runners in the history of the world. So they were just laughing. I mean, like on the Russian media, they're like, poor Paul Whelan. He has 3 things going against him. He's white, he's male, and he's heterosexual. Biden's never going to trade for him.
Who was the woman that said that? I didn't know who she was, but she spoke, quite eloquently, and I'm told that the translation was quite accurate.
A lot of the Russian, there's a lot of Russian commentary channels. It's more the Russian media is more in the European model than the American model. So you get these a lot of their news channels are 3 to 4 to 5 people sitting around these sort of like big round areas talking to one another. And we don't, it's like our old Meet the Press model, but not the same. And we don't have that quite the same model.
Well,
a little bit CNN does on occasion. Does that?
I was going to say it was sort of like The View, except with actual brains. Because whether or not you like the Russians,
very much in the European style, just much lower intellect.
So hold on a second. So Whelan does have a bit of a colored history. 4 passports. I already find that very suspicious. So they come in and then they say, we're not doing a 1-for-2. We're doing a 1-for-1, which sort of suggests, as I've heard, they were amenable to a 2-for-2, and Biden said
they said specifically, they would have sent Whelan back if one other Russian would have been sent back, and the other Russian was not that high profile from a U.S. perspective. Now, by the way, the Viktor Bout prosecution was highly, highly dubious by the United States. So the two other things that people should know about Victor Bout is it's long believed that Victor Bout was working for the U.S. I mean, the movie that he worked for, he was a freelancer. He was a freelance. Most of your arms traffickers are freelancers. They work for whoever the highest bidder is. And there was a long talk that, when the Soviet Union fell apart, the U.S. wanted to sort of poach off the best military assets, including arms runners and arms themselves, out of the old Soviet Union. He's actually, I think he was born in Ukraine, if I recall correctly. And that's what, and he was one of the best. And he's a pilot. A lot of those guys tend to be pilots, Barry Seal types, your great smugglers, because you need pilots to smuggle in drugs, to smuggle in guns, to smuggle in people, to smuggle in money, or smuggle out any of those things, as well as to be useful in military affairs. So that's why a lot of these guys end up being pilots in multiple contexts, or show up connected to pilots. And Bout was one of the best. I mean, you listen to his interview he did with RT, very intelligent, informed interview. I don't necessarily agree with all of his perspective, but it gives you a real sense of what the Russian perspective is. What Bout really did to offend the U.S. was he quit working for us. That's what he did. Putin around 08, 09 didn't want any more of that activity going on of arms trafficking to the West without the government doing it. I mean, again, the biggest gun traffickers and arms traffickers in the world are the governments. U.S. is number one by a long mile. Not far behind is Russia. Not too far behind that is Israel. I mean, there's a lot of these countries that are in the gun making business. But that's what ticked them off. So they set up a completely bogus entrapment in Thailand that had no U.S. connection. I came across that case not knowing it was connected to the Lord of War. I'd been a fan of the movie, saying, how in the world, this is like the FIFA case, but even worse. How do we have jurisdiction here? Because this is a Russian citizen meeting people in Thailand about sending foreign arms to Latin America. It's like, what does that have to do with the United States? How do we have jurisdiction here? This is, by the way, what angered the Russians so much about the Bout case. It wasn't his success as a gun runner they wanted back. It was the fact that they were enraged that the U.S. felt they had global criminal jurisdiction, roving criminal jurisdiction with no tie to the U.S. And so they arrested him. The charges, as the U.S. federal judge acknowledged, were bogus. What she said is that she gave the lowest possible sentence because she said this is really a technical crime. None of this was ever going to happen. Everybody involved was a government agent. It was as close to entrapment as you can get. Now, of course, if you have a prior inclination to commit the crime, entrapment's not a defense, but it was a practical entrapment kind of case. Also, they violated Thailand extradition procedures. Basically, the U.S. put massive pressure on Thailand because initially they weren't going to extradite him because they shouldn't and couldn't legally under Thailand's extradition treaties with the U.S. But they got massive pressure, so they stuck him on a plane, and that was it. He told him, he said, the U.S. empire will collapse before I end up before I'm still in a U.S. prison. I mean, he was a confident son of a gun, and by golly, he turned out right. You could see that Cheshire grin when he was hopping off that plane, and he was happy to do the interview, and it was all Putin talking points. The U.S. is a hopeless cause. They're like the USSR for the 1980s. They're all a bunch of drug addicts, and they got men pretending to be women, and it's disgusting. It's just this whole rant he did, which was kind of a funny rant, but it was embarrassing to Biden because of who he traded the person we called the Merchant of Death and the Lord of War for a basketball player, a woman's basketball player.
And people think that that's sort of like a degrading way or a denigrating way to speak of Brittney Griner. But I say the idea to equate the two on political importance is itself insulting to Brittney Griner. It's like, okay, Brittney, what you did was as bad. You were as politically valuable as as Victor Bout.
To her, that's logical, right? I'm an important person. I represent, the ultimate woke values. The black lesbian, occasional drug user. But it won't hurt Biden within the Democratic Party. There was a lot of pressure for him to get Griner back. I still think that it's not a coincidence they snagged Griner. I'm not buying that Russian argument that it just happened to be at the airport. Yeah, right. But Putin read Biden well. He knew exactly who to get people back he wants. But the real reason he wanted Bout back was as a statement against that method of global roving jurisdiction. And I've never been a fan of those cases. I don't think Bout was rightfully criminally prosecuted in the United States, period.
It's interesting. And now people have said that he's been in jail, Bout has been in jail for 14 years, lost all of his criminal contacts. He's not ever going to be able to go back to the arms running industry. Robert, I mean,
If he wanted, he could, yeah. I mean, that man was skilled. That man had unique skill. It wasn't just a matter of who he knew and how he developed those reputations. He was a heck of a pilot, could handle things in extraordinary circumstances, knew how to groove. It just what I recommend people watch that interview. Does that look like a guy who's been in prison for as long as he's been? He comes
14
out
years.
talking smooth, talking informed, talking, natural, looks in good shape. So he looks like the Tulsa King, Sylvester Stallone, that new TV show. This guy was ready to rock. I mean, this guy has a natural set of skills. I'm not sure he was as big as some people made him out to be, but I don't buy the Russian excuse. He was a Russian businessman who had some bad luck with some extra luggage. I'm not buying that whatsoever.